well as um, climate resilience, I believe. And so what they wanted us, or how we kind of, the focus that we were given was to try to incorporate reconciliation and indigeneity into capital projects. And so the big capital project that's happening right now is the West End sewer and water main separation. And so we were trying to focus on how we could kind of um, do that, like work into that project somehow. And so we started looking into rain gardens or water catchments of some end, or and actually just ended up having a meeting with our staff guides yesterday where we kind of were talking about possibly, instead of just having plants as the or and vegetation um as the vegetation that was catching the water, um as the rain garden, we were thinking of trying to do a community garden to kind of target stewardship within the community, and a little bit of like recentering what land ownership looks like. But then the engineer was talking about how it would be very challenging to do a food garden just because of all of it just wouldn't be safe necessarily with all of the runoff. And because New West is so hilly, there's a lot of water catchment that's coming down from the streets itself. So we were kind of pivoting to maybe incorporating medicinal plants somehow. So basically, the project we want to work on is incorporating rain gardens somehow with reconciliation as well. And we're trying to target that through stewardship a little bit, um, as well as kind of also just maybe some education around like water relationships and stuff like that, our relationships to water.
Hmm. Okay. Well, the one thing that comes to mind when I think about reconciliation and indigeneity
Mm-hmm.
with regards to water is that, for example, there's just been a big study and a policy released by the Burrard Inlet Working Group, and they're looking at water quality of the Burrard Inlet, and Tsleil-Waututh is a big participant. They're
Mm-hmm.
driving that actually. So when you think about all the creeks that feed into like a body of water like Burrard Inlet, then you can take it at the creek level and say, well, what's going into these creeks, from
Mm-hmm.
stormwater runoff. And that's where I think rain gardens are really like kind of underestimated about, in terms of what their capacity is to clean water runoff water before it
Mm-hmm.
gets into the local creeks, right?
Mm-hmm.
If you were thinking about, water quality, if there's some, if you could link it to some kind of policy
Mm.
process that's going on with a nation that is, on whose territory New West is located, then maybe you could make that connection at the broader scale. If
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And I'm not sure what nation that is in New West. If it's
They are currently in contact with six different nations. There are, I believe, 11 or so that have claimed to New West, but have asked, and six have responded that they have the capacity to be involved in some kind of collaboration. And those are the Kwantlen, Musqueam, Squamish, Coquitlam, Quaqua, and Tsleil-Waututh.
I'll just throw them in chat just in case.
so, yeah, that's a lot to kind of try to understand their own particular issues.
Mm-hmm.
But if you think about New West, like, isn't it on, like, doesn't a lot of the creek water empty into what? Into the Burrard Inlet?
Into the
It's
Fraser River.
Fraser, I'm pretty
Fraser
sure.
River. Yeah.
Yeah.
So I double check on that.
And I
Yeah.
did, I think both the Gordon and I have had an opportunity to read. I was looking at a little bit some of the work that you've been working on with rain gardens and the research that you've put out with regards to how it does help with um, filtering the heavy metals out and stuff like that. So that was really interesting to read about.
Yeah. So, I mean, I guess you could come at it stewardship of water quality. That
Hmm.
could be something that you can research, because this is a research project. It's not necessarily
Yeah,
something you will be
research.
able to implement, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I think we're kind of trying to basically propose a pilot project by the end. And so the City of New West actually is implementing 24 rain gardens, and they've located 20 different sites that they want to have them implemented already. And so I think that what our staff guide was saying was that if our project ends up being something that's like a well thought out kind of pilot project, there's the potential for them to take some kind of aspects of it. So I think it is a research project, but it's also a little bit of like a proposal for a pilot project
Right.
through research.
Yeah. Well, that's really good. I mean, sometimes you could go to, are you going to be able to go out and look at specific sites? Is that what
Yes.
you
Yeah.
want to do? And so maybe, pick a site that where, it's capturing water that would end up in the Fraser River.
Mm.
And I mean, kind of have to make a case for, like, for me, like the work that we've done with demonstration projects has been about, in a way, it has been about saying to the local municipality, you know, this work needs to be multiplied by, a million times.
Hmm.
1,000 rain gardens. It's not just about one rain garden, but
Hmm.
um, sometimes when you do a demonstration project, it does give you kind of a platform, especially if you do
Hmm.
community engaged, or if you engage with First Nations that
Hmm.
have an interest and potential stake in water quality in that
Mm-hmm.
in the Fraser.
Hmm.
And there's a lot that's
Do
been
you
done.
have any suggestions? I think the struggle that we've been coming up with this project is trying to, since we don't have, based on our timeline of it being a very short semester, trying to do this project, we don't really have the ability to actually reach out to different partnerships just based on the
Hmm.
fact that we don't have the time to hear from them reaching back.
Yeah.
So do you have any suggestions for how we could possibly, I don't know if the right word is incorporate, like I really like your idea of trying to include collaboration through stewardship of water rights, but I'm not too sure how to kind of, I don't know if maybe we just propose that as, and or if there's like some frame that we could kind of try and
Yeah.
add more details to it with.
Yeah. Um, well, you could, for example, you could look at the work that's being done on the Fraser that has an Indigenous dimension of participation. And I think there's been a lot,
Mm-hmm.
there's a lot of claim that's made to the Fraser River because of, how long and mighty it is. Um, so you could just make that argument in theory, and if
Mm-hmm.
kind of appeal to this idea that any kind of rain garden protection of the Fraser is a form of standing with the First Nations
Mm-hmm.
and the fisheries and all of the other habitat, and protecting it
Mm-hmm.
from, and you can look at the research on heavy metals and the ways that rain gardens function. So, but maybe you could find one strategic site that is
Mm-hmm.
particularly, um, you know, maybe there's a creek that feeds into the Fraser, that's also in the urban kind of core or something, that would be
Mm-hmm.
a great site for a demonstration project. So that it would invite, and maybe what you could do is think about, I mean, if it's a proposal, like, then the sky's the limit in terms of what you can suggest, but you could say something around, pick a site that's really visible to pedestrians, and it's not going to create a massive headache for traffic, because you have to be aware of plant growth in sort of high volume areas. You
Mm-hmm.
can't have plants growing too high that might obstruct the views, but some place where it's kind of it's well it's visible. And
Mm-hmm.
then say that that maybe your project is to make an example of a demonstration project that highlights and forefronts the Indigenous stewardship, the values of Indigenous stewardship, and the protection of the Fraser River. And then that's, in a way, that's kind of then educating the public on the connection between urban creeks and water
Mhm.
quality.
Mhm.
And then maybe you could you could suggest that there be some kind of indigenous piece of art or something, a
Mhm.
call out to the nations to create some kind of piece, a sculpture or something that would highlight, the sacredness of water and the protection of water, and how, an act of reconciliation is that we actually do something about protecting water quality.
Mhm.
That you could make it, frame it like that. And since you're
Mhm.
not going to have time to engage specific um, nations, you could make a really good case for why nations should be foregrounded,
Mm.
because we're on this, sort of the intersection of all these traditional territories. The
Mhm.
Fraser River is iconic, you know,
Mhm.
Yeah.
for the salmon runs and other species,
Mhm.
and that rain gardens are an act of, in a sense, they're also an act of climate resiliency if you
Mhm.
get
Hmm.
communities involved in
Yeah.
actually designing and planting. Like, and if I was you, I would, find us and actually do a sketch, like
Mhm.
do a render with suggested
Yeah.
planting. You can look at the ones that we've done.
Mhm.
Some of, or you can do like an artist rendering, or even there's a lot online that you could.
Mhm.
Hmm.
With the plants that you typically use for the rain gardens that you have done, are they
Mhm.
um kind of self-reliant plants, or do they need to be kind of maintained by different individuals, as well as are they like, do they remain throughout the year, or do they need to be kind of like replanted every so often?
They have really long lifespan, for the
Okay.
most part, around 20 years. But you
Okay.
do need to, and that's why I think, the community engaged rain garden installation it creates a kind of an ownership of that space. It's like,
Hmm.
there are all these different calls for, people cultivating gardens on little easements or those roundabouts, and people kind of adopt them, and in the neighborhood, and take care of them and weed them. And so they do, yeah, they need to be weeded. You need to be kind of looked at for things that maybe aren't doing that well. But all the plantings are considered native planting.
Hmm.
They're also pollinating, for the most part. There's a lot that pollinate, and there's some, there's flowers, so they're aesthetically really attractive.
Right.
Hmm.
And you have to get varieties that are kind of low growing. You
Hmm.
don't want the kind that's just like shoot up, because
Hmm.
again, if it's in a traffic area, that's problematic.
Yeah.
I'll send you a copy of my talk, and the slides that my colleague and I did for the Master Gardeners
Hmm.
Oh,
Club.
yeah, that'd be great.
Master Gardeners are like notoriously uh, particular about plants, obviously,
Hmm.
Hmm.
and so it was about gardening in a changing climate, because rain gardens are really like, the thing about rain gardens and the plants that you choose, they have to muscle through cold weather, and they have to be able to withstand a lot of wet, because
Hmm.
it's like a whole tank. You probably know this already. You have to, you kind of have to test the soil to
Hmm.
see, how quickly water goes down. And there always
Hmm.
has to be some kind of drainage, like overflow
Hmm.
drainage. Sometimes it's the storm drain itself. You just have to
Hmm.
make sure it's there.
Hmm.
So if the water gets too high, there's a place for it to go. It's
Hmm.
not just going to flood everything.
Hmm.
So that's the technology of it. It's really quite basic, but
Hmm.
and there's some kinds of basic rules around how far down you dig, what kind of
Hmm.
plants, why you would choose those plants, that kind of thing. But
Right.
Hmm.
if have you looked at the North Shore Rain Garden project, the
Hmm.
web pages
Yeah.
I did, yeah.
that we have?
Yeah,
Yeah,
I
so
it
you can
was really
see like,
interesting. And I was looking at the fact that you said it needs to be a little higher on the outside and that needs
yeah,
to be more drought resistant, and then the ones on the center need to be more aquatic based, um, so that they can kind of hold when the extra water kind of is flooding that area, they can survive.
yeah. All the plants tend to be fairly hardy, for both
Hmm.
cold and wet. They they
Hmm.
they really have to be. But they do two things. They filter the water, but they also slow water down because a lot of sometimes you see in like big heavy rain events, which is related to climate change, and the
Hmm.
storms are getting the rainstorms are getting harsher.
Hmm.
So the more places you have to capture water and hold it, even
Hmm.
if it's just temporarily, just so that it can slow the water down,
Hmm.
especially in urban areas, because a lot of that, I mean, not only is it full of contaminants, but it's just like, dangerous to have a lot of water flow.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So I mean, it's kind of two things. What you need to do is like make the case for rain gardens as a kind of a form of reconciliation, and
Hmm.
as a form of
Hmm.
urbanism that is um, water sensitive. It's like the blue green city is
Hmm.
Hmm.
this bigger concept of having
Hmm.
cities that manage rainwater and stormwater in
Hmm.
a sustainable way, but also green infrastructure, which sounds like New West is really keen
Yeah.
on. In fact, I think there
Hmm.
was somebody that I know took a course that was running on green infrastructure. She works at the city of New West. But I don't think you should have too much trouble making the case for the reconciliation dimension.
No, shouldn't be that.
And like I say,
Yeah.
that they've got 20 sites already identified. Like pick one that's like that can be kind of a centerpiece
Hmm.
for your project.
Hmm.
I was also wondering on like kind of like the like top level municipal
So
oh, sorry, you had something you needed to say.
I was just going to say I will email you that talk that I gave with the
Hmm.
slides that
Hmm.
they kind of make the case for rain gardens in a climate resiliency dimension.
Hmm.
Yeah, go ahead, Gordon.
Right. So I was just wondering, like, kind of like from the perspective of pitching this to like a top level like overview to like a municipal government. I know that like sometimes they have their like baked in projects like, oh, we want like green infrastructure, like kind of like more sustainable infrastructure, that type of viewpoint. Did you ever come across any issues of like trying to specifically pitch it, like maybe like a finance issue, maybe like a this isn't like, oh, just issues in general.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, it depends on who the engineers are.
Mm-hmm.
Some of them really get it and they're really on board, like just in principle, and others um, are have questions. So how sustainable are these plants? How many, what kind of work is involved for the city to manage them? And the city of Vancouver has a big strategy. I think it's called Rain City strategy,
Hmm.
where those arguments are kind of addressed. But yeah, when we first started, one of the first things we did was we had a workshop. The city of North Van and the district of North Van, they're engineers, plus a lot of other people that work in parks. Because it's like the planting part, but then there's this people that do sidewalks and streets, and there are different departments in a municipality, so you kind of have to appeal to both sides and answer all of their kinds of concerns.
Mm-hmm.
The planting, for example, it's mostly parks that do all the planting, in public spaces around cities. But in this case, engineering has to prepare the ground, and then the information around what kind of planting usually comes from the park side.
Right.
Hmm.
But in some municipalities, they haven't got a clue about any of this,
Mm-hmm.
or they're just learning, or there might be one champion who's, for example, in North Van, the engineer was a champion, but a lot of other people were, even in his own department, were kind of negative about it. So
Yeah.
you kind of have to anticipate some questions, and I
Hmm.
think those are pretty well documented. And there's a report online. I'll just resend it to you if you want.
Yeah,
It's
that would
kind of
be
like the
great.
do's and don'ts.
Hmm.
Yeah,
Yeah, because like
it's just lots to look at.
because like another thing we that I kind of just thought about was like the burden of responsibility. Because I know you guys worked on a like as a well when you guys were pushing the pilot on like a volunteer based model, and then like maybe when each city was considering it, they were internally wondering about which were the burden of responsibility for maintenance or building was for. And then an aspect that we were kind of like
Yeah.
playing about was with like maybe like a more privatized model where maybe the city would offer contracts or quantifiable benefits for like a local economy in that aspect too for these types of projects.
Oh, I see. I see.
I was wondering if you would have any like
Yeah,
say on that.
that's in.
I think if we did that though, that would be, or like suggested
Good.
that, it would be more based on like indigenous
Yeah,
led and owned um uh organizations, just a little bit.
Yeah, it's the challenge is um, if especially if there's new streets and redevelopment to refining urban streets, it is the responsibility of the city to do that. But there's some parts of the cities obviously that are maybe they're not top priority, but they could they have a real value anyway. Like in the city of North Van, we just finished doing this the one of the headwaters of Wag Creek, which is a creek that's been getting a lot of runoff, a lot from construction sites. It just seems to get funneled down there. They're dumping stuff into the storm drain, and it's coming out into the creek in a really disgusting kind of white foamy
yeah,
material. So we did a big planting at that in as that water comes in, so that is a way to slow it down to clean it. But it's really the city is responsible for that. It's just we must have had 50 people that came out to do that planting, including someone from the city. So she could see that people were paying attention. And that puts a lot of pressure. Like that's politics, right? That's the political side of it. But
Mhm.
I think for your project, if you focus on finding a good site, it's fairly public, making the case for how a demonstration project that emphasizes reconciliation and indigeneity could could be a good like a good framing of doing rain gardens in New West. It doesn't
Mhm.
mean that every rain garden that goes in,
Mhm.
that's going to be done by the city. It has to have that. But in terms of, it sounds to me like New West is already on board in terms of understanding what's required to do, like connected, this idea of connecting all of these different rain gardens, so you actually have a real system in place,
mm-hmm.
a truly green infrastructure, that's integrated.
Mhm.
Um, but it's still always good to make be aware of the arguments to for and against
Mhm.
why this is beneficial.
Mhm. For sure.
Definitely. Um, right.
I don't know if that helps, Gordon, but
Yeah, no, that was a really good perspective to give. Yeah, because we were like kind of like running around in a circle on that one.
I think that so the interesting thing about what I've been trying to like play with is like I think that what you've mentioned again with stewardship of water and water rights is a very interesting aspect that I hadn't quite considered. And so I really like that. And I'm very appreciative that you brought it up. Um, I was still trying to figure out if there's a way of just because we're trying to have it be innovative and like have it be different than the rain gardens that they already are interested in, because we only just recently found out that they
Mhm.
were going to be doing that. And so it's supposed to be an innovation project. So I've been trying to play with the idea of
Yeah,
how it can still incorporate some kind of land stewardship with through the vegetation that's going to be there. And so we had kind of talked with our staff guides potentially about maybe trying to suggest having it like be more of a, instead of having the rainwater run in like into either existing infrastructure or streams or the Fraser River, having it be kind of recycled to then maybe facilitate water supply for a community garden or something like that. And then just as we were talking, I realized
Mhm.
I worked with this woman over the summer who was part of the Squamish Nation, and she had taught us a little bit about like traditional kind of like weaving practices with different plants, and she had kind of used just like plants that she had found in her backyard, and then dried them out. And so I was thinking that maybe we could try and incorporate maybe those type of plants in the rain garden, and then it can event like sometimes be used and then for like a workshop of some kind. But I was wondering if you have any experience with um, rain gardens where the plants are used in a different way and need to be like replenished every so often. And if that like defeats the purpose to an extent.
Yeah, I I think it's I don't know. I mean, I think if you design a rain garden, you know you have very specific plants that are doing certain things, and they're placed in a particular way so that they're more likely to survive. I don't
Mm-hmm.
know how harvesting that would actually benefit the garden so much as
Mm-hmm.
I mean, but you could think of the garden as a site for learning, right? It's like
Mm-hmm.
as a reason to convene and a reason to celebrate, indigenous stewardship by maybe, as part of your proposal is like don't just, and this has always been my argument, don't just as a city install these things. People don't know what they are. It's you're not teaching anybody anything. I mean, maybe they're working and they're fine and they're invisible. And I think
Mm-hmm.
if you really want people to learn and make the connection between, climate resiliency, why capturing water is going to be more and more necessary for
Mm-hmm.
protecting, from stormwater surges and all of those things, and polluting our waterways and affecting fish and other wildlife. Um, if you just install them without any kind of, I think, I don't want to say fanfare, but something that's like community based.
Mm-hmm.
And if it's indigenous based, even more amazing. You could invite somebody, the maybe it's not the day like, maybe if you're proposing that we install this with community participation, and that maybe we have an elder, we invite an elder from one of the communities to recognize the sacredness of water.
Mm-hmm.
Um, but that's a really that's pretty potent messaging, the
Mm-hmm.
sacredness of water, and it begins, and urban sites are responsible for protecting the sacredness of water. If you want to have like that kind of more of an indigenous perspective on water, um, then you can frame the rain garden as kind of contributing to that respect, and
Mm-hmm.
protect and stewardship,
Mm-hmm.
and do it in a way that sort of raises attention to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Does
Mm-hmm.
public awareness and involve. I love the idea of learning how to do weaving with reeds or other materials that are found locally.
Mm-hmm.
But I wouldn't pull them out of the garden to do that. I
Right.
would I would say it's more of an appreciation, like it's sort of tied into appreciation of what are these plants that are in the
Mm-hmm.
garden, and what are these other materials that are around us,
Mm-hmm.
that we could work with.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, maybe that's a stretch, but I'm sure there's a way you could make a case for it.
Mm-hmm.
Definitely.
Yeah, no, I definitely appreciate that.
Mm-hmm.
I think that's all of my questions for the time being. I don't know if you have any others, Gordon.
No, I think that covered everything I needed to, or wanted
Okay.
to hear about.
So I'll send you a couple of things that relate
Mm-hmm.
to this. And I also did a talk for. It was a dance group called Mascal Dance. They did a big performance piece, and they traveled all over New Zealand and Canada on the role of water, water and climate change.
Okay.
Mm.
And when they were doing kind of some learning activities, they asked me to give a presentation on green infrastructure, and I
Mhm.
could send you that. Like,
Yeah,
and
that'd
there
be
was
great.
a lot of indigenous focus on sacred water, the sacredness of water, uh, the blue green city, that kind of thing. I think is important. Like
Yeah.
it's sort of the context.
Hmm.
That's why I feel like the rain garden is kind of like an entry point for a lot of different conversations.
It is for
And
sure.
in and of itself, it's a pretty functional and aesthetically quite lovely thing.
Hmm.
Hmm.
But it's also
Yeah.
a really good way for people to actually get their hands dirty in installing it, because you can do public rain gardens, and I think that is the responsibility uh, of local government. But there's lots of places on private spaces, because you're talking about sort of the private side of this,
Hmm.
where homeowners can actually look at their own properties, because there's a whole move to capture rainwater, take off your downspout,
Right.
rain barrel
Hmm.
in there, that kind of thing. Use that rain barrel to water your garden, get rid of your grass, all of those things is all part of
Yeah.
climate resiliency. But, building a garden where water might be coming off your roof, I mean, every site is different, and it's tricky because some places now are requiring you have a permit to do that. But
Hmm.
uh, I think there's a move to, it's all about creating places where water can infiltrate, where there's porousness, because that's
Hmm.
the whole thing about urbanization is we've taken away the natural water cycle, the ability for water to kind of work in a cycle, because
Hmm.
there's no place for water to go. And that's why we have these massive floods, because it's just getting funneled down, pipes, and uh,
Hmm.
pushed into creeks. And then those creeks are overflowing and getting polluted. So
Hmm.
it's not very natural
Hmm.
to say. I think the rain garden is kind of like an attempt to get back to how nature actually works in practice.
Hmm. For
And
sure.
again, teachings around indigenous stewardship are about natural cycles
Hmm.
and respecting and supporting natural cycles.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry, I'm just writing stuff down.
Yeah. That's
Something to think about. I mean, it's
yeah.
all part of, you're building a kind of a case
Right.
Hmm.
for um, not just why, but, how you would do that, how
Yeah.
you would create a rain.
Yeah, and like the messaging tactics you would use to kind of sustain this type of like understanding would be
Yeah,
yeah.
that's right. And yeah, get people interested and connect the dots between,
Hmm.
oh, rainfall. I mean, they have all those projects with the school kids where, adopt a stormwater drain.
All
Well,
right.
actually, no. Back up from that and look at what's going into the drain. Like, yes, okay, let's not block them with leaves and that kind of thing. But basically, you're just saying, like, just send the pollution into the drain.
Hmm.
And that's, to me, is missing a kind of a really important piece.
For sure.
Yeah. Okay, well, I'll send you a few things, and if you want to talk again, I'd be happy to check in with you.
Great. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, Joe.
Thank you so much.
Great, nice to meet you both.
Nice to meet you
Nice
too.
Okay,
to meet
Thank
you.
you.
Have a great rest of your night.
okay.
All
See
right.
you then.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 Ooh. Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. Okay. Let me end the